Hello and welcome to the pre-work assignment for Live Lesson 1.03. We are so glad that you're going to be part of our live lesson. Remember, the pre-work assignment is required in order to attend the live lesson this week. So please be sure to watch this entire video, complete all of the activities, and bring your notes and completed activities to your live lesson, which is part 2 of our assignment. Remember, you will need the password given at the end of this video in order to attend the live lesson. Let's get started with what are units. Units are ways to measure amounts. We use many different units. The common units are used for measuring distance, mass or weight, or volume. But units can be used for other things like internet usage on your phone in gigabytes, currency or money. That's a way that we can use units because they represent things with values or amounts. How much is the value of gold? Gold coins, money can be converted into gold, so that is an example of a unit. We have dollars, we have yen, we have euros. So remember, there's other types of money or currency used in different countries, and we can convert them also to U.S. dollars, especially if you're going on a trip. Units are used to measure things like speed, like in a car, miles per hour, kilometers per hour. What about substances? If you were making brownies, you use units to measure that, cups and ounces. We have common units that are used all the time. For example, for gas in your car, we usually use gallons. It would be so weird if we changed all of the gas pumps into something that says gas per cup. You can imagine how much a cup of gas would cost. And of course, things like your weight, we use pounds or kilograms, depending on what country you're in. Well, do you know your conversions? The conversions chart is found in our EOC reference sheet. What I need you to do is to download this reference sheet and save it to your computer. You will use this reference sheet throughout your course, but most importantly, you will see our common conversion chart on page 2 of this reference sheet. So how do you get to it? Go into your Algebra 1 course and go to the announcements page. In the middle column, under Course Resources, you will see an icon that looks like this. It will say Algebra Resource and Help on it. So you click that icon, and then you will see all of the resources for the algebra course. Please scroll down past Module 9, and you will find a link that says the EOC reference sheet. Click on the download and save it to your desktop or to your Algebra 1 folder, however you organize your documents on your computer for your algebra course. Once you've saved the sheet, you can open it up, and on page 2 of the sheet, you will see our conversion chart. So that's your first task in this pre-work activity, downloading the EOC reference sheet. You will need this throughout your course. Now let's talk about measurements a little bit more. Since we have so many different ways to measure items, let's talk about the importance of determining the correct measurement. A good rule of thumb is to use something small when measuring something small, like a small unit of measure. A gram is very small. An inch is small. So it all depends on what you're measuring. If you're measuring something that is large, then you use a large unit of measure. If you're measuring the distance between here and New York, so from Florida to New York, you would measure that in miles. Imagine what kind of number you would get if you measured that in feet or inches. So it's very important to use the appropriate unit of measure. Let's take a look at another example that we can all relate to. Think about the volume of a bowl. Remember, volume is how much something would hold inside. Imagine if we measured the volume of a bowl, a cereal bowl, in cups. That makes sense. We can say the bowl holds about 2 cups. Now imagine if we measured the volume of our bowl in gallons. Oh my goodness. A gallon is much larger than the bowl itself. So we would say we have 0.125 gallons. So have you heard someone say, I have 2 cups of cereal in my bowl? Or do I have 0.125, 125 hundredths of a gallon of cereal in my bowl? So of course, to make things make sense, you have to use the appropriate unit of measure. Now that we talked a little bit about measurement, let's think about what we can measure in each of these items. So I'm going to call it out, and then I'll pause so that you can think about what you can use. And then I'll explain. So let's first of all start out with pounds. What is something that you can measure in pounds? Well, the thought process for pounds would be that pounds measure the weight of something, how heavy it is. 1 pound, if you think about your trip to the grocery store, 1 pound would be something like a group of grapes. So pounds is a unit that measures weight, and it's not that heavy. However, if you had multiple pounds, like a 120-pound person, that's a much heavier amount. But again, pounds is still appropriate. So pounds can be used to measure something like apples and oranges, or even the weight of a person. Let's think about meters next. What is something you can measure in meters? Well, I hope you're thinking distance. Meters is used to measure distance, so things like length and how deep something is. We can say the pool was 10 meters deep. Wow, that's a very deep pool. But again, meters measure distance. So think of length. How many meters? So things that you can measure length or meters with refer to the length of something. Okay, it's time for ounces. Think of something you can measure in ounces. Okay, well for ounces is kind of tricky because ounces can be used to measure weight, or ounces can also be used to measure liquids. For example, if someone has a baby, they usually say, my baby weighed 7 pounds and 5 ounces. You can ask your parents what your birth weight was, and they would probably tell you pounds and ounces, referring to weight. Now the opposite would be something like a juice box. That actually refers to volume. So how many ounces of juice is in the juice box? So ounces can be used to measure different quantities. Let's talk about gallons. What is something you can use to measure gallons? Well, I won't give you a whole lot of time to think about that, because the common thing that comes to my mind is milk, a gallon of milk. So gallon is used to measure volume. How much does the container of milk contain? Let's think about grams. Give you a moment to think about that one. What is something you can use to measure using grams? Grams measure the mass or weight of something. So you can use grams to measure small quantities of things. For example, 3 grams of salt. Grams is a very small quantity. 1 gram is almost the weight of a paper clip. So that'll give you an idea of what grams is used to measure. Very light substances, things that are not heavy. Let's think about kilograms. Kilo means 1,000. So these are things that would be measured using 1,000 grams. So now we're talking about heavier items. A kilogram can be used to measure a person's weight. After we get off of this session, go online and type in your weight and convert it to kilograms. There's a lot of online conversion tables that convert from unit to unit. You will probably like the number you see in kilograms versus pounds. And then let's talk about centimeters. We already talked about meters and said that meters measure distance. So centimeters are 1/100th of a meter, so a very short distance. So centimeters can be used to measure things like the length of an eraser. That would be a good thing to measure in centimeters. So a smaller quantity of length. Now that we talked about all the different measurements, let's now talk about what you need to do for your pre-work assignment. So you have downloaded your reference sheet. The second part is now to go ahead and on a piece of paper, list questions 1 through 10 and write down how would you measure these. So what is the best unit that you would use to measure each of these items? Remember, you may use the internet to research these if it gets tricky, but go ahead and type in what unit you would use to measure each of these items, and you will use this in your session. As you write these down, you can pause this recording. So just click on pause at the bottom, and then you'll start back up once you finish that activity. Now that you've completed the activity and you've downloaded your form, the next thing you need to do is to attend the next live lesson. This is part 2 of this assignment. The first thing is that your teacher is going to ask you for the password in order to get into the live lesson. The password is measurements. So please write that down on the same paper you did your 10 questions on. Remember, you should already have the EOC reference sheet downloaded, and you should have your 10 questions answered as you enter your live lesson. Be sure to remember the password measurement, and we can't wait to see you in our session.